That now my appreciation for him has increased.
Exactly.
I can't believe it.
Yeah. Still got a cannon arm too, man. You go out and throw the ball with him.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going to move us from that into an equally important conversation, and then y'all can come back to that one afterwards. So, yeah, guys, thanks for joining today. I am really excited as we continue kind of just this consideration of reset. How we're all replanting in some ways, we're all going back to basics in a lot of ways, kind of stuff. The last couple have been a little bit more head and heart, if you will. We kind of talked about just what it looks like to reset all together back in September, and then Elliot Grudem led us in kind of the fact that our leadership's hearts really matter, and so let's make sure those things don't get lost in all this other craziness we're walking through. And as we turn our attention today, just a little bit more toward the hands, toward the actual stuff of ministry. There's plenty that we've all had to wrestle with, systems, structures, priorities, metrics, this kind of stuff. Everything normal feels like it's gone out the window. And yet there's some things that are still true. There's some things that are still the right priorities and right metrics, even if they look different. And then, yeah, some of things are utterly different. And so my friend Kevin Peck is going to walk us through the idea that our systems are being reset, and that metrics and priorities really matter. And if I can assume a little bit of what Kevin's going to talk about, the right metrics and the right priorities really matter, because we all measure something, we all prioritize something. So I'm at an airport right now, so forgive my background announcements happening here. But I am going to give as much time as possible to Kevin. So I just want to pray and then give him the floor. And he's going to invite questions and that kind of stuff throughout. But yeah, let me pray. So God, I thank you for Kevin. I thank you for Austin Stone. I thank you for, as we were praying beforehand, the way that you have graced the Stone in being super generous with the resources and gifts and talent, especially, man, the talent that you've given their staff and their team and their leadership. Thank you for the ways that they've blessed their city. Thank you for the ways that they've blessed your kingdom. Thank you for the ways that they've blessed so many churches across so many different veins and networks and denominations and states and beyond, and especially beyond. Thank you for the ways that you use Stone to bless the nation. I thank you that metrics and priorities and systems are not unspiritual. I thank you that you're a God of order, that you're a God of priority, and that you care about things and you call us to care about things. So yeah, I just pray that you would teach Kevin, even as he teaches us. We're trusting your spirit to do the good work through him today. And would you help us all as we, whether we're just now planting or whether we're 20 plus years in, having to ask about metrics and priorities, would you cause by the power of your spirit to pay attention to the right systems that need to be reset in your name, for your glory. Amen.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Everyone hear me all right, I'm assuming? Okay, great. And you guys can use the little reaction, you can use it, like do something like that if you want to raise your hand or whatever and slow me down. That's fantastic. In fact, today, most of what I'm going to say, I hope actually just brings some order out of chaos, because I don't know that I'm going to have a ton of original thought for you all, because I think most of these things have entered our brain space that I have to talk about today that we stumbled on. But sometimes it's good just to hear consensus to know that you're on the right path. I mean, that, Ben gave me a compliment before we got on and just said, hey, talk to Todd. And Todd had said, hey, Kevin made these great leadership changes and we're really proud of them. And so Ben was like, hey, so great job. And I'm like, it does feel a little bit like bragging the day after the draft about how well you drafted. No one really knows, because there's no rear view mirror yet. And so a lot of what we have right now for churches is saying, hey, here's some things that I'm seeing. Here's some things that seem to be working. But I don't want to have the hubris to tell you, men, that these are the right thing. I mean, my elders asked me the other day, Kevin, we just need you to plant a flag so we can rally around it. And I was like, I'm going to pull that flag out of a place you don't want to know, because I don't know where to get it right now. And so I think everybody is looking for some stability. And I think the best place that we're going to find stability in our ideas right now is in consensus. Get some good dudes around that think well. And if we all seem to be hovering around the same thoughts, man, I think that's our best shot at it being a good idea. But we don't know. And I think there's just a reality of that bringing us into a submitted place before God's Holy Spirit and saying, God, you're either leading us all into a great amount of discipline, or you'll lead us all into some flourishing. Either way, I think the best possible scenario we have is to go and do it together. And so let me just share and maybe put some thinking around, maybe some points around some thoughts that you've probably had, that I'll either bring you some relief and saying, okay, good, that's kind of how we were thinking. Or maybe there'll be some places of challenge where you thought, man, we thought of that, but we went the other direction. Even that might be helpful to you. And if nothing else, be able to collect your thoughts. Maybe there's some organization here that I can provide you that you can rediscuss with your leadership teams wherever you're at. So that's my ambition today, is to just maybe to navigate some really choppy waters and some uncharted seas together. So first, some of the things that Ben asked me to talk about are just what are some of kind of like the culture shifts, the metric shifts, the structure shifts, the system shifts. So I've actually tried to organize it in that direction because I think they are quite interrelated. In fact, if you're doing them well, you shouldn't have a sensibility about what's changing in your culture and then just come up with some random different changes in your metrics. They do stack. And so I think if you can get clarity around what are some of the things that are changing in your culture, good and bad, or at this point, some of them will be like, it just is, and there's going to be some good and bad that come with it. Capturing some of that reality, and then transferring it to, okay, therefore, what do we need to change structurally? So if this is what's happening in the culture, then our strategies are going to change a little bit. Therefore, our structures need to change a little bit. Therefore, we're going to measure some different things. And then we're going to do evaluate. So just realizing that those things kind of move down a chain. It's when those things get disintegrated that you actually get bad stuff. So right now, if there's a bunch of things that have changed culturally, then hopefully you're changing some strategies, right? If people just decide one day, and this would never happen, that we're just going to stop having church on Sunday, right? I used to say Sunday comes with alarming regularity, but now it doesn't. So if that changes, and if you don't change your strategy, then you're dead in the water. But most of us have. But because we changed our strategy, now if you don't change your metrics, you're blind. You don't really know what's happening, right? So we are actually trying to connect all of these. So let me just give you some observations about some cultural shifts that I've seen that we're having to, some of these we're not driving. Like usually you talk about culture as something we're trying to change. Well, poop, 2020. It chose for us some things that we're going to change at such a systemic level that we're now having to adapt to what was just a neck snapping shift in, I would say, not just American culture, but global culture that we're having to adapt to. And so I don't want these to be as much about, are they good or bad? Assigning more morality to these cultural shifts. I think that's a worthwhile thing to do. And I think we want to be wise to see, are there some things that are going to be good and bad about it? But some of these aren't to be argued. This just happened. And so we need to deal with it. Okay. Does that make sense? So we can talk about the good and the bad. And so don't think these are a list of prescriptions like normally we do, like, here's what your culture should be like. You guys have read those books? Fantastic. Not relevant in 2020. What we want is, here's some things that did happen. And now how do we deal with the reality that our culture changed over months, if not overnight. And now what do we do about it? Does that make sense? That's the approach I'm taking to culture at the moment. It's not the engineered kind, it's the adaptive kind. So here we have it, guys. First thing is, almost overnight, there was a reordering of priorities in our church, and you had very little to do with it. Bummer. But there was just a reordering of priorities, and there was an impact on that in our churches. Some of the ones that I've seen that were massively reordered overnight, and maybe some of these, again, were already part of your culture. I just want to know that just because they're part of your culture, the order of values changed. And we all say values, like church values, as if they're all like perfectly equal. It's just not the reality. Values oftentimes come in tension to one another, and you choose one over the other. There is this sense in which there was a reordering of all of our priorities. It was just demanded on our organizations. And so our organizations may over time be able to critique that order, but we need to start with where they're at. You all have kind of sensed this. If you're living in the urban core, so we have some congregations in the urban core, we can value family all we want, but we don't start there because it's not valued there. Okay, so we want to critique culture there, but what's valued in that space is personal expression, creativity, self-awareness. There's some really cool things that connect with Jesus. Like Jesus is into self-awareness. He wants you to know just the depths of your terrible soul, and he wants you to know how highly valued you are because you're an image bearer. Like that resonates really easily. Then to go on and say, you ought to care for this other unit of people more than yourself. Well, they don't have that value. So we're gonna try to move towards that one, but we want to start with where they start, right? That's where we want to start. We want to start in those places of what I just call like the redemptive part of the overlap of the Venn diagram, where God's values intersect the church. Like that's where you start. You know, we say that relationally, like find the person of peace. Well, organizationally, we find the value of peace. Some of these things got massively shifted, and they're not all equal. Okay. And so we're gonna have to, like, as it were, you're in a sense, you had to go, oh my gosh, it's almost like replanting because the world just changed. Could you guys imagine trying to start Zoom community groups like a year ago? Like, it'd been like stupidest thing you ever told me. I've been like, no, that's just dumb. I might even told you it was anti-biblical because I like to make strong statements that I often get proved wrong on. But now, like, everyone's like, oh yeah, for sure, you got to do some Zoom groups. Like, duh. The Stone had never done online live broadcasting of services. Like, we were like, no, we don't. We want to make sure that people have the right priority about showing up. But then all of a sudden, priority shifted. Right? Do y'all feel that? They just overnight they shifted. So here's some ones that I've noticed. Number one, our priority for personal safety has massively shifted. Now, in some of your spaces, it's gone way up. And for some of you, it's just bumped up maybe one or two, okay? Just depends. My friends in Houston live in a different reality than in the Austin, okay? I drive to Houston, I'm like, y'all talk about the pandemic like it happened. Whereas in Austin, it's like, we're still thinking like you should bury gold because the zombie apocalypse is upon us. So it's different, but you felt safety no matter where you were. It changed, right? Personal safety, like that. It didn't enter a lot of Austinites' heads. Here's the crazy thing: religious liberty. For whatever reason, it has people that had never even conceived of thinking about that are thinking about that now. So that's a reordered priority in your church that maybe you were the only one talking about before. Like when you said, hey, check out this ERLC article on religious liberty, I'll tell you, most people in Austin didn't know it was under threat. But now if they lean red, they for sure are talking about it. And now wearing the mask or not wearing, it's all about religious liberty, meeting, not meeting. They don't even want to show up, actually, because they're going to stay at home. They want us to meet, though, to prove that they have religious liberty, even if they're not going to actually utilize their liberty to show up. But we felt their value shifting. Did you guys feel that at all? The safety and religious liberty, and they seem to be a little bit in conflict, which is crazy, but they changed. Another one was concern for the hurting. Praise the Lord. This one went way up. Our church's value for the priority that we would place on helping hurting people one of the biggest things I got at even the very beginning of it, and still get it today, is, are we taking care of our members who have lost their job? Are we taking care of members who are experiencing COVID? Are we taking care of people whose businesses are failing? No one ever talked to me about, are we helping members whose businesses are failing? Never got mentioned in 18 years. Gets mentioned all the time right now. So this concern for, is the church caring for those who are hurting? Man, that priority just through the roof. Awesome. I actually love it. Engagement with the community. Are we doing something to help the hurting in our community? So it's the second one, not just hurting inside, but engaging the community outside. What are we doing as the city tries to come together, as our community tries to come together? That priority for us was pretty high at the Stone. It still went, I could still feel it get just crushed up. I actually have been feeling it getting pressed down the more mature our organization gets, but this culture shift, it's pushing it back up. I don't know if you guys felt that, but just engaging the community. Those stories for our folks are the credibility they're looking for right now from us. Is, are we helping? Are we on the front lines? Are we helping with PPE? Or if you're from a different space, are we helping fight back are we fighting back the religious liberty tyrants? Like, they want us to engage out there. There's an increased priority on that. Oddly enough, reaching kids and students has actually gone up a bunch, which we'll talk about why in a moment, but there is a reordered priority. And I think it's because everything else, the common constructs around kids and students have been, deteriorated. And so there's a great concern right now for kids and students, people who once were just show up on Sunday, that you were begging them to disciple their kid, but they're like, forget it. I don't like, we've got lacrosse. Don't be silly. There's now built in a massive, like, what are you doing for my kids and what are you doing for my students? Because I don't know what to do with them. That has changed. Again, not all contexts are these going to change in the same order. And the last one that I've noticed I think is worthwhile writing down and engaging with your set of leaders on is the reordered priority for clarity and tone of communication. In my history of ministry, which is about 20 years now, I have never seen a priority for clarity and tone like right now. It is amazing. There was no world in which anybody other than super crazy people would ever leave your church over one sermon back in the day. They will straight roll you now. Like, one comment in one sermon, they're like, I don't think I can do this anymore. For what, wrong or right, we'll get into what's happening in a moment. It's actually going to be our third discussion, but the priority that they want you to place on what you say, what you don't say, how you say it, just know that their priority for that has just gone like crazy through the roof. And I think that's a conflation of COVID, election, racial justice conversations. All of that together has created this demand out of our people that we highly prioritize communication, really particularly. And this is, for those of you who are like church plant new to the game, this is distinct and different than other years. So just ask the old geezer sitting around the table. If you're like, dude, if this is ministry I want out, this is not normally ministry. This is distinct. I have so much compassion right now. I spend 10 hours of my week right now just meeting with young leaders in my church to go, it's not always like this. Hang in there. I mean, you guys are feeling the attrition, the depression rates. So like all that's a for real thing because of, I think, a lot this demand. The demand on us to essentially create clarity out of massive confusion and disunity that's existing right now in our society as a whole has never been higher. So we need to acknowledge that. You can't just, so again, here's what priorities do in your church. When priorities shift, your time arrangement changes, your strategy changes, the resource it takes to accomplish that priority change. I mean, could you imagine if your church just decided kids are a priority and let's just say they never were before? That's a really, really expensive change. Like for those of you who've ever done kids ministry, it's super expensive. Just if you really want to, if you want to crush it and you want to compete with the gospel Joneses, as it were, you're going to drop some coin to do kids ministry. Because priority will change how much time, how much money, how much resource you spend on it. And I just want to say, same thing with like clarity of communication. The demand there is exhausting resource, whether it's mental, decision, leadership, margin, money. It's just gonna take. And I feel so bad because I've had a number of churches reach out and say, how have you guys stayed on this top clarity of communication? I'm like, our communication budget changed by 150% this year. And not everyone's gonna be able to do that. In fact, some people are having to cut budgets, and I'm like, it wasn't cheap. Like, that's just a reality. It was a beatdown. And it's not durable. You can't keep doing it, but we did shift based on this increased value, or it was going, I mean, we're going to pay for it one way or another. People are going to quit. People are going to leave one way or another. We felt if we don't engage this, one way or another, this is the new priority, whether we asked for it or not. We wanted to respond to it. So those are some reordered priorities. You guys, there's others that are within your church. It's just useful to engage. Those are some ones that for us were just massive. Now there's priorities we wanted to go up, like small group. Like we knew that was the answer to some of these priority stuff, but it wasn't one that was shaping us. It's one we were trying to shape. It wasn't. People were like, man, you know what I need is a small group. Like that they wanted all these other things, but it was still just as hard a slog as it ever was to get people to do the difficulty of actually engaging in a group of people who all have different demands and engagements and life stages and tiredness and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's worthwhile to take kind of the values that you have, write down these other values and maybe more that you saw, and just try to go, where are these at with our people? Where are our values and these, like, what I just say, like situationally driven values, where are we at? It's so useful just to sit there and get to some level of consensus with your leaders. Otherwise, you're going to get disunity. If you guys can't agree on value, you can't agree on decision. But if you're just looking at your historic values, I think there was such a dramatic shift in the culture right now that you have to acknowledge the values that have been placed on you in conjunction with and negotiated with the values you're just going to keep pushing forward with. Okay. Yeah. Jim, you had a question, bro.
Yeah. Maybe it's the wrong time, Kevin, but just real quick on that, like recognizing certain values that have shifted and seeing, I'm sure all of us did, seeing opportunities there. Mm-hmm. But like you use the small group, one as an example. We see an opportunity as maybe a value either shifts or intensifies, and yet it's hard to engage people still. How do you know what I mean? Like in some respects, I mean, I appreciate your, battling through a little bit the communication budget and stuff like that. But in some sense, it's like, yeah, because that's easy. Like we can do that.
Yeah.
And put ministry in people's laps in a sense, or at least communicate what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
But when you start to get into getting people, engaging people into something, and still finding resistance. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or
it'll dovetail nicely. I mean, I think you and I are thinking in the same direction. The next kind of major cultural shift was from programmed rhythms to personal coaching. And this is what began to address this. This was a big cultural shift. The reason you can have programmed rhythms is because they're common rhythms. And so even in the way that we teach, like, let's say missional community, those have become broader rather than more narrow. There's also programmed rhythms like, hey, we're all going to get together and do leadership training. But all of those programmed rhythms just got shook. They just got shook up. Because here's how you establish program rhythms is you're actually creating lines of commonality between different groups, right? That's how it makes sense, right? Because I mean, when you decide we're going to get together at 10 a.m., there are groups you pull together at 10 a.m. They're usually preschool stay-at-home moms, okay? But what happens if you can no longer gather kids? Well, now those people's lines aren't the same. They're like, well, I'm not in common with her anymore because her childcare is open, mine's not. Or because she's a working mom, I'm not a working. Like all the lines got shook. And so here's what happens in this massive shaking of the earth is there is this season that we have to acknowledge where there is a reconstituting of commonality that we have to engage with. That means the only way to reach them while that's happening, while the tectonic plates are still moving, is going to be individual coaching. It stinks. It's really, really time intensive because we had to coach them through finding their new lines of commonality. Like this is bananas. I mean, you know the number of groups that were formed because their kids played the same sport at the same school. But then half of them decided to stay in digital learning and half decided to go. What brought them together no longer brings them together. So these lines of commonality are really, really interesting. And I think it's the overall kind of thing that we need to look at is moving from program rhythms for a short time into actual personal. And when I say personal, I mean personalized coaching. If you want to help the tectonic plates like settle quicker, it has been one of the most time intensive seasons I have ever seen in 20 years. Because everyone will need to help individually. You help them find their new rhythm because everyone's life got shifted. Normally, you can count on just like major life stages. And people were going through the normal, like, okay, we know when people get married, they have a tectonic shift in how they arrange their relationships. Now they can't just find her friends and his friends. They got to find their friends where they both sets get. And then when they have kids, we know that there's a tectonic shift. And this is when usually you'll notice people will reassociate with different groups. Just what they have. So life stages do that. When people move their homes, they tend to change groups. When people change maturity levels, like a significant breakthrough, they tend to shift groups. You guys have kind of figured out for your demographics, for your individual communities, when those, and they're so patterned now, you've created without even knowing it, programming rhythms to help people reshift when it's time. So like at the Stone, no one really knew why, but we have a newly and nearly married class. It wasn't as much about the information for being newly and nearly married. It was actually, that's where we rebirthed new groups. When people were like, well, we're the only married people out of a group. We want married couples. We just want to know, like, and so you actually reassociated around new lines of commonality. Well, right now, I have never seen in my life such a shaking of normal common lines, which I think is going to require moving from those program rhythms to personal coaching. So let me just tell you some common lines that have been shook. Here's some new drivers of common lines that are no longer life stage. So you guys have figured yours out. So I'd encourage you to write down what shook people into having to find new relationships. What before was kind of the cohesion. So maybe for you guys said geography before, okay? Some of you guys are geographically driven. And that may still work. It may not right now. So write down what you think were those lines of commonality, those bases of connecting people. And you just go ahead and write Jesus at the top. Like I know Jesus is the commonality. Fantastic. There are other ones that help people form and stick in a community. What are they? Write those down. They might be leader driven. They might be geography driven. They might be life stage driven. Like what are those things that you're at a shake point when they tend to get into flux whenever they change out of that commonality. Okay. So most of us try to think through those. Here's some new ones. Risk aversion for contagious communication. Like people are just worried about, some people are really risk averse. Some people are deciding to have relationships based on that alone right now. They don't want to have friends. that don't wear masks, or they only want to have friends that don't wear masks, or they want to have friends that they trust are at the same careful level as them. It's really weird. But I've watched my neighborhood do this. There's like we call them the Republican Joes, like 2 streets over. And I think they're still like making out with each other and stuff. They don't care. And everyone in the neighborhood that is like has just found their cul-de-sac. And then we've got the, moderate mollies, and the moderate mollies, they're outside, they're not wearing masks, but they are socializing, and the kids can play together, but parents still have to moderate how much the kids touch. And then you've got the rest, the scared Sallies. And the scared Sallies, I mean, it's like kids are playing socially distanced with masks on, like Simon says, like that's all they can do. But I'm watching groups that used to hang out don't hang out anymore, and they've reoriented. So risk aversion, schooling realities is really changing people. If you've got dual working parents, and their kids are not back in school, or their kids are part digital, like, dude, it is wreck and shop on their relationships. Just know that. Work realities. There are some people who are, if you guys know doctors and nurses, they have a different mentality right now than people. And you've got folks that are in, blue collar jobs. They've got a different reality than you've got the white collar job person who can work from home. It's reshaking their realities. And so, how does each one of these person re-engage in the Christian life? Well, that's why I'm pointing these out. You're going to have to coach them, like individually, because you can't just do a whole group, because that group now actually is in flux because they actually don't agree on what's common at the moment. Now, you might be able to keep them together, but you're gonna have to coach them through it one-to-one. Is what I'm finding, because the groups themselves don't represent a common unit anymore, at least not in the short term. Once you can get them in reformed groups, then maybe they are again, but programmed rhythms moved to personal coaching. So this is where I'll just tell you, like, old structures won't work in this new reality. And so some things that we've just discerned and seen is groups need to get smaller. So wherever you're at, it's usually smaller than that. We used to do groups that were like, the magic number used to be like 20. For married couples, it was a little less. Singles, it was a little more, or kidless, it was a little more. They've all shifted down. Wherever it was at, they've all just kind of shifted down. Married groups now are usually like 3 couples. That's it. Because once you add kids, it's scary enough. It's tough enough to do it. They've all just shifted down. You have to deal with digital demand, where people are demanding non-live engagement with digital fatigue. Yeah. You can't win right now, just to be honest. They don't want to come to your meeting, and they don't want to get on digital, and they want you to somehow to figure out the miraculous 4th dimension or something. No one gets it. And so what you'll have to do is, either whether you're going digital or live, you're going to have to communicate it and over communicate the need to be there, and just call out the reality. Hey, friends, we're going to meet live because we all know you're sick of Zoom. But we also know you're scared. Some of you are scared, or you're on a spectrum. Listen, please just acknowledge the difficulty I'm in as a leader of finding common ground. Please engage with me. But this, again, is one-to-one. Like, you may have to call them and just say, I'm not going to be able to pick your fave, because your fave doesn't exist anymore. Because the people who want to meet in person like it used to be, and they can't have that. And the people who don't want to meet at all, they don't want your Zoom, which is the only option. So nobody's winning right now. Nobody gets the meeting they want. So often at times it will take some personal coaching to actually go, I just need you to engage. Man, I'm sorry. I know you're either sick of Zoom, or it's a little bit hard to come in person. Come with it. Here's the last bit. Because our old structures are broken, and because program rhythms are turned to personal coaching, vision casting and inspiration is a significant part of ministry that you probably didn't think much about before, because it was intuitive and because environments just led to it. Vision casting, like just keeping people like excited and on the mission, or just general inspiration in general, is that from a need side, all-time high, and our tools are at an all-time low. I mean, honestly, most of you are just inspiring to be around, and now they're never around you. You're spending half your time now communicating information and very little inspiration, because it's hard to be inspiring right now. Things suck. You're just begging people to hang with you. Or like at service, where you were preaching, but there was also these moments where you were being inspiring. A lot of those go away and don't communicate digitally as well. So I don't have the answer for this, but I do know that we're spending tons and tons of time and attention on, hey, I want you to take time to create a venue just to inspire. Just not just hang in there, buddy, but let's move forward. Like, let's engage. Like, God is good. Gates of hell aren't going to prevail against us. Like all that and inspiration. So much of that used to be programmed into rhythms of, yeah, that's how we started each training. Like, but now everything's gotten whittled down, pared down, and a lot of what's gotten dropped is what was actually the easiest to you, which was good old fashioned, just inspiration. Inspiration. It's just really gone. Okay, that was the second one. So reordered priorities, programmed rhythms are moving now to personal coaching. Last but not least, and this is a big one. This is the third big cultural shift that I'm seeing that we're trying to engage, is addressing a survivor mentality rather than a thriving mentality. Gosh, this has been a beatdown. So much about vibrant churches is because you're the kind of person who's not playing defense. You're the guy who's saying, we're flourishing, we're moving, we're going. You're not all the way complaining about how crappy the church is or how hard it is to be a Christian. You've been a thriving kind of person. Those are the churches that everyone knows grows. Ones that communicate optimism of the future. Like, you guys know this, as soon as a church gets in the defense mode, the survival mode, they die. Well, what if your entire culture moves into the survival mode? Well, it's hard. Here's some things about addressing a survival mentality rather than a thriving. We want to move back to thriving, but if you want to move to thriving, you have to address surviving. You just do. People aren't ready to thrive if they aren't convinced that they're going to survive. They won't. So here's some things. Assume trauma in people right now. We have programs that are like, okay, you're integrating into a missional community, but then I notice actually there's so much trauma in your life, like you can't be healthy there. So we have a plan for that. We have plans for, and that's why like 12-step programs exist. That's why recovery exists. Like there's a plan for addressing trauma. Or maybe if you're group formation, that's what you did at the beginning, is you dealt with, how do we learn gospel fluency? Because those things address trauma. Somebody whose family has just undergone like murder or something like that, you would know, let's not go in and go, let's serve, let's get on mission, let's plant a church. They're gonna be like, but you would address the trauma. Everyone is in trauma right now. Everyone. You have people who are in trauma and recognize it, and then you have liars. Like, that's it. That's all you got. How many of us have had to just sit there and cry with our children again? I'm sorry, but we can't do a birthday this year. We can't. It's not going to be the same. I know you've been working really hard at baseball. Season's canceled. Like, that sucks, man. There's so many things that just plain stink right now. And so people at least have a low-grade trauma right now. And then listening to the news, it's genuinely traumatic right now. There's so much pain, and there's so much hurt, and there's so much disappointment right now in the world that you can expect that people, almost everyone in your church, is in a low-grade depression. It's low grade. Now, they may experience an anxiety, they may experience sadness, but there's just like a low grade. How many, if you're honest, just have a low grade sadness all the time right now? It would be weird not to, man. Like, I'm just a little sad. Like, how was church? Good. It was awesome. But what I mean is, I'm still sad for what's not. It was better than it could have been, but I'm sad. How was your anniversary? Not as good. This is not as good. Like you made the bet. I mean, you made lemonade. She didn't want lemonade. You wanted margaritas. Like, it's just sad. So how do we move forward? Like, we have to address the trauma in our people right now. If you have people of color in your church, they don't have low-grade trauma right now. They have high-grade trauma. I'm just telling you, this dude. So how do we actually change our strategies and our structures around the fact that you have an entire population that's in trauma? Good news. The New Testament was written to churches that were in trauma. So good news. There's playbook for it. But we can't assume we're on, we're not always on the back end of Acts. Right now, we might have to go back to the first couple of chapters of Acts. Make sense? Okay. Assuming trauma, fighting fear. Our people are terrified. They have different fears, but fear of loss of job, fear of COVID, fear of their kids are going to be weird now, fear of financial failure, fear of Republican takeover, fear of Democratic takeover. I mean, people are afraid, man. Crazy thing is the Bible says one command more than any of the rest. You guys know what it is, right? Because I'm leading the point here. I am bearing the lead here. They're scared. Leading scared people is different. Leading traumatized people is different. Leading scared people is different. When you're leading flourishing people, you don't assume that they're scared. They're not. Flourishing people who are like excited about flourishing, are ministering out of wealth, as it were. Our people are like ministering right now at best out of trauma and fear that they're having to deal with. They may be fighting well, but they are fighting it. They're having to. And then lastly, survivor mentality. You know how churches that are dying always end up finishing themselves off because of infighting? You all ever notice that trend? It is one of the stages of poverty, is eventually there's a fight for resource. And right now, our churches, our people are in that stage of fear and trauma. You are fighting a disunity battle right now in your church all the time. I mean, if you didn't know that, then, I mean, your head's buried. I mean, of course, we all know this. I have had to just, more times than any time in 20 years ago, hey, slow your roll, bro, same team. You coming on me strong, man. You're coming in hot. Like, made one statement, one letter, and now you're acting as if I have been on the edge of trustworthiness for years. Like, no, there's just going to be a constant engaging in the unifying of the church that maybe before it could be seasonally. You're like, hey, vision series, that's when we get it back, baby. Or once a year community. That's not your space right now. It's pretty much constantly encouraging unity, or just assume that you're losing to disunity. Okay, I'm done with cultural shifts. Okay, let me move quickly forward then. Here's some structural shifts. These are going to be much easier because they take less requirement. Because they drive out of the other ones. Let new realities and priorities drive your structures. So for us, we made a pretty significant shift week 2. I kind of did this exercise and said, okay, what are my people going to care about, and what do they need, and what do we need to value right now more than anything else? If everything else, because I just knew if we kept trying to do everything plus, we weren't going to do it well. And so for our mentality, it was, what do we know we have to crush? Now all hands on deck, okay? And so for us, it was care for the body and care for our city. We knew we had to crush it. We would lose our gospel witness if we didn't. We knew we were going to have to figure out new ways to connect people. We knew we were going to have to help people grow in Jesus when all of our normal structures, things like classes and discipleship material, we knew it all was going to be jacked. And then we knew we were going to have to get communication right and digital liturgy right. Those 5 things. We took our whole staff, and I told everyone, by the way, just set fire to your old job description, or at least hit save on it, because that's not your job anymore. We're going to re-rally around this. You're not going to be amazing at it first. That's okay. We're all going to have to learn together. And so there was some structural shifts around your new reality. That was us. You may be different. We're certainly in a different stage. So we've had another reset since then. But you're going to want to look at what are the big shifts in those priorities that have taken place, and then look at the whole, and rather trying to bolt it on, there is going to be a sense in which you need to re-slice the pie for different, and creating your structures around that. Because for us, I mean, we have 6 congregations, and so it makes sense to have a person at every single congregation overseeing kids, 1 or 2 people. Well, what about a world now where we're just recording kids and sending it out? That does not take 6 people. You're like, well, Kevin, what did you do with 6 people? I didn't lay them off. We're just retraining them for something else. But now I need someone to call every group leader. Okay, a lot of kids ministers became customer service for group leaders. And they did their best. Like they just did their best, and they got better, and then they were great by the end. Because I'm like, well, I don't need that. I need this. Does that make sense? So when things like that shift, if you just kind of like leave people in their role and you leave teams organized the same way, oftentimes they actually will just keep trying to fit the new task into their old job. And so you want to change your structures around your new reality. So if you don't have a team that's specifically on care, that care person was getting buried and your kids' people were playing Parcheesi. You know what I mean? You had a worship leader who was like, great, well, we don't have a choir anymore. It's just an acoustic downgraded set because we're still figuring out the technology. Well, what else are they going to do with their time? Does that make sense? Well, we just reorganized and basically did a draft, drafted people onto new teams and set them loose. Okay, so you guys, we talked about most of the group stuff. Groups are going to need change. The structure of groups needs some change right now. For some, again, I don't know your context. You may live in a part of town that's like, what COVID? But they need to be smaller. We need to engage digital. We need much, much, much higher coaching because you guys know that the word of the year is like pivot. Well, if you can't have a plan, have a coach, right? Is what it is. If you can't have a plan, have a coach. And so you're going to want to get as close to one-to-one, high-trained leader to anybody who's leading anybody. And then groups need new tools right now. There are tools that require face-to-face. We want to move away from those, and we want to move to ones that can be done digitally. Self-pacing is much better now because groups' rhythms are all whacked. They're all wackadoodle. So safe pacing. So we had someone who just worked on doing a survey with the groups and figuring out what tools needed reshaping, and they went to work on new tools. So smaller digital options or inclusion, higher coaching, new tools. Those are kind of the things that we saw were structural changes to groups. Digital engagement was the last structural change for us that was really big. It's just going to require an investment of in this stuff, like digital engagement, not just digital distribution. That's the big shift. We had done digital distribution before, but it was so just like, hey, if you missed, we weren't going to follow up. Like we weren't. It was just, it's out there. Here it is on the ether. It was dessert. Well, what happens when digital isn't dessert? Sorry, I got a fly that went straight in my ear there. What happens if digital isn't dessert, but it's the main course? Well, engagement is the issue now, not just distribution. So we'll tease that out in metrics, but digital engagement is the issue. So you need to think about how long you can do, like time parameters change when you're on digital. Technology needs to change if you care about engagement. The skills you need to have in order to pull that off. Like we had to retrain a lot of people. And then delivery mechanisms, delivery opportunities are going to change a bunch when you talk digital engagement rather than just digital delivery. Okay, let me get through metrics and then we'll be ready for Q&A, okay? So some of the metrics that changed for us, guys, is engagement statistics were significant rather than just attendance significance. That's the issue, right? So whether it was groups or whether it was online, engagement became our new reality, not just attendance. Because attendance would be really lacking and didn't tell us enough anymore. And so things like, engagement stuff would be like, hey, we don't just want to know if your group met. We'd like for you to actually tell us, we just asked them, you measure engagement. Was the conversation, was it, somewhat agree to, or highly disagree to highly agree? Everyone participated in the group. We want to know that right now. We want to ask questions like, hey, give us some feedback on your dialogue time and places that you need coaching or correction or help. Like all those are driving you towards understanding engagement rather than just did they come or not, which was fine before. Maybe it wasn't great. We're actually learning we like this a lot better, but it's super necessary right now. We're measuring impact versus just input. The metrics have to shift to impact, not just input. So things that used to just be scale. How many volunteers did we get to go serve at the food bank? Well, we're not going to be able to do scale things as often now. And so we're trying to measure impact so that we can still report back to people and give them vision for things that matter. So now it's not just number of volunteers, it's things like number of families that were served versus number of people that went. We were actually able to get really high impact, even if our inputs kind of changed. Same thing with like, we're not just measuring how many dollars we gave to the organization. We actually want to know what that resulted in, so we're going to report that back. Those are really, really important to people right now. Qualitative versus quantitative metrics. These have changed a lot. And the last one's going to matter the most, which is going to be money, but qualitative versus quantitative. We want to know things like frequency of being in the Word, not just did you show up to church. So for us right now, because I don't know if my strategies are good because they're new, and because I don't know if yours are any good right now, qualitative measurements have never been more important. Knowing, are your people remaining in prayer? Because you may have like, oh, we got this great prayer meeting. That's actually irrelevant because you're not going to know until late whether or not it was helpful. Hey, we came up with all these new great ways to do Bible study by yourself. It's not helpful if it's not increasing people's passion and love for Jesus. And so this is one of the first times in history where you're really going to have to measure as you go how effective something is, because we can't wait on the next conference to tell us whether that somebody else usually does the research for us. Am I right? Like, well, actually, I end up reading this thing by Stetzer. He always ends up doing it. And this actually doesn't work. You need to do this. Well, we're having to do it on our own right now. And so qualitative measurements are your friend right now. So surveys are really, really helpful, even if they're just like Likert scale stuff. You feel more passionate about Jesus after studying the scriptures, or somewhat agree to somewhat disagree. That makes, you guys know the Likert scale there. It's that. And all these are qualitative, but they are helpful to let you know, are we trending in the right direction with our endeavors, or the opposite? Last but not least, I just say money matters right now. And here's why. Number one, you need to be able to survive. It's going to be that most personal style leadership you've ever. If you can't do events, you have to do personal coaching. It's expensive. It just is. It always is. That model is always expensive. Secondly, though, it's one of the best engagement metrics you can find. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, I have no idea how many people go to the Stone anymore. No clue. I do know how many people give to the Stone. And I do know that people don't give to things they think suck or they've left. I do know that much, especially in Survivor world. They will cut you if you don't matter right now. So money is it's just one of the things that's easy to measure, but use some insight. We're measuring things like number of givers. Like, is that increasing, or like your overall bottom line just could be some people that are willing to give because they know it's a time of need and they give a lot. But if you're losing givers, it tells you something. You're losing engagement, or your people are getting more poor. But either way, it's like, it's helpful to know what's happening. You want to look at number of people increasing their gift versus decreasing their gift. Again, it's not because you're trying to be gross. It's just I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, I just don't have that many handles to pull on right now. Like I don't know where they're at, but I do know that people do respond with their pocketbook. I don't always know how to interpret it, but it makes you ask really good questions right now. So if you're not carefully analyzing the finances, I don't think that you're using metrics very well right now, because it is one of the most important right now, not just for survivability, but it's just tangible, and it's the only one that's actually the same as the other ones before. It's just like, I know if less people are giving, that's bad. It either means they lost their job and I need to care for them, and I've got to find a way to do that on less money, or it means I'm not adding value, or they're walking away from Jesus or something. But it says something. So I would continue to lean into that. Okay, guys, that's it. That's what I got. I'm just going to open it up now.
Thanks, man. What questions do folks have? Fire them off quick. Then we're coming up to the top of the hour.
So on the coaching piece, would you say, I guess I have a little bit of an assumption that is, you're maybe even adjusting levels, like where maybe you had lay coaches. Now those lay coaches aren't skilled enough really to navigate this. And so you're moving to more staff-led involvement. Anyway, tell me about that.
Yeah, they're at least getting a partner in crime for a while. The level of problem solving, the level of knowledge necessary for that is just going up. Before it was, you had a coaching layer that essentially is like, be familiar with the play. Well, the plays don't work right now. And so you're either at least going to want to pair coaches with somebody or direct coach. So we kept our lay coaching layer. They just each got a concierge, basically on demand staff member. So it's, and they got checked in with multiple times a week until they felt comfortable mutually agreeing on, let's just go down to one time a week. But they were just solving so many problems, and they didn't know, because nobody knows. They just needed to hear somebody at least say, I validate your decision, let's try that. And then that way we're also collecting better information. Lay coaches don't typically give you as much real-time feedback as you would need to pivot. Our staff members, we can train them to do that. So, hey, ask all your coaches this week. And so it was a redundancy, but now that we're scaling, we're glad, because now some of those folks that were lay are now trained up where they're like, call me every once in every week, and new coaches are going with some of those concierge coaches. I know that's a really goofy rich boy word, but we didn't have a better one.
Following along those same lines of thinking, as you had groups become smaller, were we all doing new leader training? Did you see folks stepping up and saying, yes, I can own a group at least for the season kind of stuff, and do online training for them, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So we basically, we have a team that are working on tools and a team that are working with people basically simultaneously. And the new leader training is changing right now, because we're changing them for the new reality. And there's a team that's doing that. But until we have the training, we just get intuitive leaders with the new leaders to start training them. And so we kind of have separated into what we call like intuitive leaders versus trained leaders. Intuitive leaders are great for when you're like, you can't wait 6 months right now to get the perfect training. So you want to get your intuitive leaders on the ground and then replace them with trained leaders as those kinds of folks come online. And so even when we would just define groups at the smallest common denominator, not the largest anymore. And so if there was a group of 8 families, but they weren't going to get together, we're like, you're 2 groups for a while. You guys hang out in the park when you want to at the informal level, but let's informalize the big and formalize the small, rather than vice versa, which is what we usually do. You're one big group that had 2 LTGs. Now we're like, no, we're going to coach the LTG level right now, because that's probably going to be the gap. That's going to be the actually stickiest part of the group during this crisis. And so y'all get together when you want to. Actually, don't care about that. We're going to coach the small layer.
I'm curious, what did you and other high-level leaders stop doing? You mentioned slicing, structurally, you can talk about that, but what did you personally, as your job, you were focusing on this, but now you're not doing that? Yeah.
Yeah. So we, basically anything that was on the innovation docket that wasn't a direct solution to this just got cut. We just said that's off right now. So that helped significantly. So just to say, our visions are irrelevant right now. We need to see where they make sense. So anything that we were doing, like we were working on new deacon training, like so excited about it, cut it. Just, I mean, it's not relevant until we feel like we have rebuilt margin. There was like our leadership development stuff, not our leadership coaching, but that like future oriented leader stuff. We're just like, it's cut for now. So things that are really future oriented, like systematic theology, like that's cut. We're going to keep gospel centrality, but we're going to cut systematic theology for the first 6 months, just because we needed the brain space. We cut a ton of like what I'd call extraneous but helpful programming things for worship. So think like we used to do, like, hey, we're going to do, you know, spoken word or all those kinds of things. We cut those down until there was margin to do it. So some of those have built back up, but we just basically cut and just said, you need a great sermon, you need a great worship, like, and then even worship got cut down because we found out engagement dictated that it'd be less than an hour. And so we just, and preaching got cut down to 25-minute to 30-minute sermons because people just log off. So I'm like, I'd rather have 25 minutes of gold than nothing, which was kind of our options. So a lot of those just kept like slicing things down. Any kind of like events that were helpful, but were going to take up a lot of time. So like camps for us, like kids camps, student camps, we just cut them. We're like, we might be able to figure out something, but initially we just said, listen, we're going to waste a ton of brain space trying to figure out how to do something that was built for an event world. And then we'll add back after we cut it. So once we reassign teams, so we put a team on kids and student liturgy, but we didn't keep the same team. So it was like, hey, 3 of you now go refigure it out, but we're going to cut what existed. And even at the risk that you say we're going to add it back, we're like, if it was event driven, it got cut. Retreats, seminars, those kinds of things, that a lot just got cut out of those realities because we were going to have to adapt them so much. It would actually just take up brain space. It would be easier just to cut them and replan something. So we just said, hey, some of this stuff may come back, seminars that we may figure out, but we're cutting it so that we didn't lock ourselves into having to prioritize it. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Have you guys found a way, and feel free to jump off when we need to. I know we're already over time, but Kevin's got lots of answers and we have lots of questions. So, connecting new people, not just to the church, but into relationships. You guys found ways to do that?
Yeah, so the biggest way we found that is actually taking staff that now have bandwidth. There's a lot of your staff and elders. A big place that we asked our staff, elders and deacons to step in was you start new groups. And so people are more likely to take a visible leader and trust them with a dumb experience, like maybe it has to start out Zoom, or even trust to show up to your house. They tend to trust people they've seen before to do that with professionalism. And that is the requirement that people have right now. So we took a lot of our cats, again, like children's ministers, they're awesome people and they know everybody. Turns out our children's ministers were almost all able to start groups because they knew families. We took a big list of people that we knew should be in a group. We call them the connectables, that should be in a group that are not in a group. We created that list and we're working the list all through COVID. And the way to get those folks in was to establish an actual established leader, even if they're, children's person who's never led a group before, but trust is what people want right now. And that children's person, they trust them with their kids. Yeah, they'll show up to their house to work through new material. So that was one way we've done it that I think is the most effective so far. A lot of other things, I don't know if they were effective or not. They just were.
Hey, Kevin, now that you've started adding some things back in, and I think you guys are even meeting on Sundays as well, as we're not post-COVID, unless you're in Houston, but
Congrats, guys.
however long that kind of transition period is between now and somewhat of a new normal, 12 months, 18 months, 6 months, I don't know, whoever wins the election, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to be a long-term investment?
Yeah.
You know, so it's not a band-aid, and not to
Mhm.
minimize some of the things we've all done, but it's not a band-aid. It's completely resetting something, or it's a new
Yep.
tool in the
Yep.
toolbox.
Yep.
What do you think's if you could pick 2 or 3 things that, man, that's a long-term investment, it's worth the time, money, effort, and
Yeah.
even now thinking through 12 months down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say digital-based leadership development is going to be a long-term tool that stays in. I mean, you guys are seeing it here at this level. It's now been introduced. I mean, the good thing about COVID is even grandmas know how to use Zoom now. Like it retrains society for you. It's something that you probably tried before but didn't work and it was stupid. I'm not saying you're not going to have to effort it, but I think it was really hard to get coaches to coach small groups because we knew that no one would do a Zoom call. So you had to get them together at lunch, but then no one showed up for lunch. I think you can pull some of those things off again now. So I do think any investment that you have in building leadership cohorts or leadership rhythms that are digitally based, I don't think that's going to be wasted at the moment. And so if you have curriculum that's really good for a digital based cohort model, that's going to continue to be really, really helpful. I even do think digital classes are going to make it through, especially if they're live in digital format. So I think there's, we all did Sunday based classes before. I know we certainly did, or, large group, mid-sized group based. I do think having an option for a digital one will stay. Because I think there's enough people that travel and whatnot or moms that have now said, because before it was live or nothing.
Mhm.
I don't think that's the new reality going forward. I think people are like, yeah, live preferred, but I've been in digital. It's not that bad, and I just want to take a class. I know more. We started. This is our first year ever offering digital classes, and we now have gotten more than half of our population to take one. Which is nuts for us. So we're just like, okay, so after COVID, it'll go away. But I bet there'll still be a demand of 20% in perpetuity.
Are
That,
those
yeah,
live? Those classes, were they live?
they are. So it's this format with the Zoom ability to share screen and do slides if you want to, and the breakout groups in Zoom have been really, really helpful even. But yeah, so like men's breakfast, 6 a.m. stuff, I've never had a leader who wanted to commit to it. I do have a lot of men who will commit to it. And now we can have a revolving leader with an established Zoom link, which will be a perpetuity kind of thing. So that was a big one. I think some of the other stuff is digital giving. I think is forever. So you should have been there, but if you're not, you're there now. And then genuinely, I think at least for a while now, any investment that you put in groups is going to pay off in the long run, because I do think there's a worldwide ethic right now that says no one's going to have to prove the essential nature of community.
Right.
I mean, we'll forget soon. It'll probably be 5 years and we'll forget it, but for a while, people believe you.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll honor Kevin's time. Maybe one more question if anybody has it. You sufficiently gave us all of your expertise, and
Yeah, I hope it was
so well,
helpful,
we don't
guys.
have any questions. Man, thank you, Kevin, so much. That is so super helpful. God has gifted you with a mind and an ability to take wisdom and make it practical across a lot of different people that none of them like anybody else I know. So thank you for sharing
Thanks,
a little bit of that grace with us. So, the gift you unlocked that in ways like you've locked others. That's the most pertinent for today. So.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, guys, we're going to attempt to be together live for our next monthly gathering. I'll send out an email because the other folks had to jump off already, and I want to inform folks who can jump on today anyway. But November 11th, we're going to be at Doxology, and we're partnering with Exponential to do one of their regional roundtables. We haven't spent a lot of our plan forward budget this year because we've done this instead of Bayou Lunches, and so we're going to cover the cost of one person from each church. So Matt and Ryan can arm wrestle. Who gets the free one. But yeah, it's a little longer. It's learning from folks across the nation, like Leon Trump and Chen Ra and Setzer and kind of stuff. So mark off November 11th, starting at 11:30, going a little longer, going till 4. ability to meet, and blah, 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 blah. So October is almost over, but November 11th is when we'll be together. So help me thank Kevin real quick. All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.